uh, especially ini ya, kajian-kajian environmentalist ya, Kemudian juga Sofiah PhD-nya sama-sama saya di ANU, tapi topiknya sebetulnya menarik melihat environmentalism dan Islam di Indonesia. Kemudian Sofiah sebelumnya di Singapura di IS, jadi expert di sana. Sekarang Sofiah masih tetap aktif involve atau terlibat dalam berbagai macam-macam kajian tentang lingkungan, menginisiasi satu lembaga baru namanya Hornbill. Nanti mungkin Sofiah juga bisa memperkenalkan apa itu Hornbill, di Singapura. Sekarang beliau basisnya di Singapura. I think we can start hari ini sesuai dengan ekspertisnya Sofiah. Kita akan membahas soal ekositis. Memang di mata kuliah, terutama mata kuliah teori politik perkotaan, juga ada beberapa teman-teman dari mata kuliah demokrasi dan HAM, Democracy and Human Rights, juga mata kuliah lain. Tapi untuk di teori politik perkotaan, sebetulnya topiknya menarik, kita butuh elaborasi, makanya kita butuh Sofiah untuk introduce us, apa sih pendekatan ini apa, dan what does it mean. Okay. Alright, so I think I was disconnected. It's just awful. Alright, anyway, without further ado, I think we should just continue, and I will let you lead the process, Sof, to give you the opportunity to start your lecture. Please, maybe perhaps if you can introduce a bit about yourself and your work on Hornbills, we would really love to know about that. Jadi saya persilakan langsung ya, Sofiah. Ini kita kuliahnya pakai bahasa Inggris karena Sofiah meskipun kakeknya orang Indonesia, tapi dia udah dari lahir dan besar
lebih fasih dalam bahasa Inggris
di Singapura dan di Eropa dan di Australia. Jadi dia lebih comfortable, lebih nyaman, lebih fasih, lebih bisa artikulatif dalam bahasa Inggris. Ini juga kesempatan buat teman-teman untuk bisa exercise your English conversation juga. Sof, silakan.
Selamat sore everybody. Thank you for having me, Mbak Ayu. I will speak slowly, and if anybody needs clarification, just let me know. So my name is Sofiah Jamil. I'm Singaporean. Well, currently I am in Malaysia. That's a long story, but Ibu Mbak Ayu and I were friends when we were studying in Canberra in Australia. My background is in political science and international relations, and I have been working on environmental security issues since 2006 in NTU, in the Nanyang Technological University. Where I was a research analyst there until 2012, doing work on climate change, disaster management, more or less in the ASEAN-Asian region. Then I went on to be in Canberra with Mbak Ayu to do my PhD. Halfway through my PhD, I started a company with my ex-colleague, Hornbills Concepts and Communications, which is basically about blending political risk consultancy and PR. I can tell you more about that later, but essentially it's about putting the consultancy, putting the research in political risk and political governance and risk management into practice. How do you engage people given all this research that you know? How do you communicate it to people? Because a lot of us, we know what's happening, we study political, environmental governance or government governance in general, but how do we actually make it happen on the ground? And how do we engage different sectors or different people? Because different people have different ways of understanding, or they have different touch points. So it's about understanding how to communicate, how to engage with people, given their level of understanding or level of awareness. So I'm just here today to tell you more about eco-cities and whether they are really sustainable. Let me just share the screen. Yeah. So when we start, okay, let's talk about eco-cities in general, right? What comes to your mind when you hear the word eco-city? And I want this to be an interactive session. So, just type in the Zoom chat, like when you think of the word eco-city or sustainable city, what do you think of? Can you just give me some answers, either in the chat or, just unmute yourself and tell me? Anybody?
From my end, a city with full of greens.
Okay, full of green, yeah. Lagi? Anything else about how do you go around? Any country that you can think of, any city you can think in the world that is sustainable? Don't be shy. Okay, green city, yeah. Anybody else have ideas about what eco city is? There's no right and wrong answer. Because actually, when I explain later, the term eco city means a lot more than just green.
I think eco city is open space with trees, with recycling, like something like that.
Okay, yeah, good. Ada lagi? Anybody else?
I think integrate.
Sorry? What do you say? Integrated?
Yes, integrated.
Yeah, okay, good word. Yeah, integrated. Those are very good. That's a very good word, actually. Green and integrated, environmentally friendly. Yeah, correct. Healthy, yes, very true. Yeah, so when we think about eco-city, it's actually more than just environment, The environment takes into different aspects, and I'll go through that right now. So yeah, some of you mentioned green. Yep, it's an urban area. There might be some green trees and parks around. There might be some vertical forests, growing trees or growing trees within the urban concrete buildings. Yes, self-sustainable. Thank you, Adrian. Yeah, and then obviously with energy-wise, you want clean energy, clean renewable energy, not from fossil fuels. Ideally, you have an integrated transportation system, and you're not using fossil fuels for your vehicles. So you have more bikes, for example, and like who was it was saying? I feel like you were saying integrated. So your transportation system should be integrated where when you get off the train, you are able to take a taxi, or you're able to take a walk or your bicycle. If you're taking a taxi, hopefully it's a car that's running on solar or hydrogen, right? So these are the things when you talk about integrated transport system. Making transport easy for you, walkable, accessible. These are terms that come up when people think about, or when people are talking about eco cities. And of course, there's also the food element, right? Eco cities need food. Where do you get the food? How do you produce the food? What is, are there chemicals in your food? And, a lot of us living in the urban areas, sometimes we don't know where the food comes from. We know it comes from the supermarket. Okay, it comes from some farm somewhere, but where is this farm? How are they managing the farm? So these are all questions that we need to understand in building an eco-city. Can the urban area grow their own food? And there's already a lot of technology out there that does this, hydroponics, vertical farming. It's just a matter of, do you want to do it in many instances? So this is Richard Register. He is an urban ecologist, And he is essentially the person that first started the word eco-city. He created the term eco-city. And for him, an eco-city is an ecologically healthy city. And he thinks that no such city exists. This was when he was talking in the 1980s, you know. So eco-city is a short form for an ecological city. An ecological city has to be healthy. So this is what he said in 1987. What do you think about now? In 2020, do you think we have cities that are ecologically healthy? Yes, no, maybe? Does it exist today? What do you think? Let me know. Yes, no, maybe. Please type it down or just tell me. Does an eco-city exist today in 2020? Is there an eco-city in the world today? No? Yes? Maybe, okay. Some of you are still thinking about it. Maybe not sure. It's okay. I'll let you know the answer. So I would say Scandinavia, Tokyo, yeah, good, Bimo. But Norway, Sweden, you're talking about those countries, yes, they're fairly sustainable. Yes. Tokyo, yeah, that is very integrated transport-wise. And so when we're talking about these eco-cities, these sustainable cities, the commonality that they have is that they are able, to different degrees, to balance people, planet, and profit. You know, this is what is known as the triple bottom line. You know, balancing these social concerns, the environmental concerns, and the economic concerns. So this is a very tricky situation, a tricky balance that needs to be done, and this is dependent on your specific location, what resources they have, and in the end, and the most important thing is people. When we talk about ecologically healthy cities, the people have to be healthy. The people actually have to have the good quality of life. And oftentimes when eco-cities are built or talked about, the people, or at least some sections of the people, are forgotten. You know, so I would rephrase it and say an eco-city is an ecologically healthy city. No such city exists as long as inequalities persist. You know, as long as there are social inequalities, income inequalities, people are not treated, equally, that's not an eco-city. And I think even the best eco-cities we have in the world today, there's still some level of inequality. So today, I'll be covering my presentation in 3 parts. Basically, first, the definition and rationale for eco-cities, what are the challenges in developing eco-cities, and what is the future? How can we actually what is the future? Are they sustainable in the future, and how do you sustain them? So when we talk about ecological cities, Richard Register, as I mentioned earlier, mentioned one definition. It's an ecologically healthy city. Other people have, created definitions, varying definitions to it. Ecological requirement combined with socio-economic conditions. And essentially all these different definitions somehow incorporate the people, planet, and profit solution. That said, definitions really depend on who's defining it. You know, if it was a person in the transport industry, obviously they'll talk more about how integrated transport is the most important thing in eco-city. They wouldn't talk so much about, say, food security, for example. So it depends on who you're talking to and who are the people implementing policies for eco-cities that we need to be aware of. And actually, when you think of eco-cities, it's not a new thing. It's essentially like a satellite town that was built to reduce the population pressures in urban areas. So, for example, in Indonesia, you have Jakarta, being a metropolitan city, there's always been efforts to try and reduce the pressures, the population pressures in the city. Hence, satellite cities have been developed to try and push people to move there for economic jobs, for economic livelihoods. Malang, Surabaya, but still people are still attracted to Jakarta, yeah. But you now have Bandung, which in the last few years has really been a lot more busier than usual as well. So the idea is to reduce the pressure from one urban center, and this has happened in throughout history to varying degrees. And the term eco city is often interchangeable. People use it, sustainable cities, eco towns, but the most important thing when we talk about it, it needs to take into account these three, the triple bottom line: people, profit, and the planet. So going back to Richard Register, he developed this four pillars with 18 standards for what encompasses an eco-city. The first pillar is urban design, and this relates to how close you are, how everything you need should be within, for example, walking distance, or on a bicycle ride, a short bicycle ride. I should be able to go to the supermarket and it shouldn't be too far. I should be able to go to school and it should be too far. So you reduce the need to travel by car, basically. The second one is green buildings, where your buildings should be fortified with clean energy. It should be designed in a way that doesn't take up a lot of energy, and more greenery to increase the level of the forest cover in an urban area. Safe and affordable housing, that's also very important and often forgotten in eco-city when people think about sustainable cities, because if people don't have affordable housing, then how do you even live in a city, and environmentally friendly transport. Are we at a position where we can say that our buses and trains can run without fossil fuels? We are far from that, I think. There are some tests being done, and there are some places where this is possible, but on scale, en masse, we have far to go. And the second pillar is biogeophysical, and these are all your resources. The nuts and bolts what people need to survive. How do you manage your resources, your natural resources? How do you manage your waste? Your materials, whatever materials that have been manufactured. How do you recycle them? How do you upcycle them? How do you dispose of them in a environmentally sustainable manner? What are your clean and renewable energy sources? Is it solar? Is it wind? What is the air quality? If you're having production or manufacturing, how do you manage the air pollution? Clean and safe water, healthy soil, which would then allow you to have healthy and accessible food. So if you look at these two first pillars, it's a lot of points there. The standards are mostly in the biogeophysical, and then followed by social cultural, and then urban design. 6 standards from biogeophysical, 5 from social cultural, and then 3 and 4 from the other 2. Social cultural then shows you that you need a community, you need people to be of optimum health, optimum mind, and good quality of life before they can actually be productive in an eco city. So I think I'd like you to take a look at that. Like, when you think of an eco city, the only ecological standards are just those 3: healthy biodiversity, you're knowing how much the earth can how much of a carrying capacity the earths have, and how much of ecological integrity that city has. These are 3 things out of 18 things. And this is important to note, because it's ultimately what people do that determines the eco-city. It's getting the basics right before you can have the ecological health of the city. And so another way of putting it, according to Richard Register, is small footprints in geographical and ecological terms, conserving land, energy, and materials. And also, it has to be responsive to the local character and conditions of the area, both cultural and natural conditions. So, in Indonesia, we adapt to the tropical climate, right? In Southeast Asia, we adapt our eco-city that is conducive to our nature. We work with nature rather than against it. So, what the rationale behind eco-cities is that it addresses the problem of increasingly unsustainable and vulnerable cities. Urban cities are increasingly overpopulated and often unsustainable for the people living there. These are statistics since 2018, in 2018, and increasingly there is always more and more unsustainable results coming from cities that do not transition to more sustainable forms of doing things. 1 out of 4 urban residents live in slum-like conditions. 2 billion people in the world don't have access to waste management services. And these are basic things you need for health and sanitation. Water, water and sanitation, those are basic things for good quality of life. And only half of the world's urban population has access to transport. So if you imagine someone who doesn't even have a car, private transport like a car or even a motorbike, what do? They have to walk. They have to, find some way to get around. So, what kind of quality of life do we want to give people who live in the cities? And let's not underestimate the effects of air pollution, because air pollution has also caused 4.2 million premature deaths, and this was only in 2016. So the quality of your air in cities, has a great impact on people's health. And there's also been studies that talk about how living near green areas or having more exposure to natural spaces increases children's immunity or people's immunity to diseases. I have a friend who has been doing some research and on this, particularly with students, with children. And it's important to realize why green spaces are important, because it's not just for making the city look pretty, but it's also for people's own overall mental health and overall wellness. And ultimately, ecological cities would be the most beneficial to urban slums, because they are to the urban poor and informal sector, because they are the most heavily affected. You all would understand this, given the conditions that the urban poor face in Jakarta already. I won't go too much into that. But what it would, given that if an ideal ecological city were to happen, these are what the urban poor would be able to get: safe and affordable housing, clean and safe water. They are able to live in a place that is safe but also close to the place of work. More opportunities for jobs and training. The informal sector don't have any social security. They don't have any social, insurance. So if a disaster happens, they don't have, anything to support them, right? So it's making sure that they are taken well care of and have an improved living standards like the rest of us. And of course, eco-cities and sustainable cities also means being sustainable in your food. And given the fact that urban cities are so dependent on rural areas, and given the increasing intensity of climate issues, that can have a major effect on on agriculture. And this has already happened in the recent years, where the droughts or floods in Thailand, in Indonesia have affected the crop production, and this increases the vulnerability of the farmers. It doesn't only cause vulnerability for urban people who depend on the farmers for food, but more so the farmers who depend on that specific season for their livelihood. So it's ideally, at the end of the day, when you have an eco-city, the ideal definition of an eco-city with all those 18 standards, you would uplift people out of poverty. And this is just statistics based on climate risk. The greater the prevalence of climate disasters or environmental hazards and disasters, it's a big economic cost. So it makes sense for governments to transition to more sustainable forms of life, more sustainable infrastructure, because at the end of the day, it's a cost to them, and the trends only increase over time. So when we talk about the challenges of developing eco-cities, we need to think about two kinds of eco-cities. One is the projects that have been, to build totally new eco-cities from the ground up, like, take one plot of land and develop one whole new city there, The other option is, how do you upgrade those existing cities you have? How can we make Jakarta more sustainable? How can we make Kuala Lumpur more environmentally sustainable, more resilient to floods and so forth? But more importantly, when in both of these cases, it's important to think about these few questions. How are these eco-cities politically, economically, socially, and culturally governed? Who calls the shots? Who has the power in these different cities, in these different fields as well? What are the different power dynamics between the businessmen and the governors, for example? Do the local leaders have a say? Do the community leaders have a say? These are important things to think about when you're thinking about developing eco-cities. And more importantly, what are the tensions that might come about from technological innovation, urban development, and sustainable living? We can't assume that we can have everything without an opportunity cost. There's always an opportunity cost, and that is why the balance between people, planet, and profit is difficult to achieve. There was to have more of one pillar, something from the other pillar will not be there. And ultimately, when you have these tensions and conflicts, how can you resolve the tensions in the best way possible? So here are three tensions that arise from the people, planet, and profit, in trying to balance the people, planet, and profit between economic or urban development and people. There's a conflict of property, right? You want to expand the city, you want to grow the city, you need more space for whatever green buildings, but hey, what about the people living on that existing land? How are you going to engage them? You have a conflict of resources. Do you want to use your funds? Does a local government want to use X amount of funds for economic activity or for environmental protection? How do you manage those things? How do you manage the limited amount of resources you have? And then there's a conflict of development. Some people, and I will explain this, talk about this in one example in Singapore, where you want to have more environmental spaces, but then, it causes problems for people in those areas. They don't want to have, there have been cases where there's more human-animal conflict as well, in some cases. So as much as you want to be near nature, can people themselves handle nature? So these are different things that we need to think about. And as you're thinking about eco-governance, environmental governance, and developing sustainable cities, think of where the faults are and where the gaps are in trying to balance these three pillars. So in building new eco-cities, here are just some critiques that people talk about, that is being said in the literature currently. It is often described as being just big investment projects, because if you're building a city from ground up, you need a lot of money. Where's the money coming from? So in the end, it's just an investment project, and to make it sustainable, you need to market it to the people with money rather than the people without. So a lot of the eco cities that are being developed these days, it tends to be marketed as to the middle and upper class to buy a home there. You can't expect someone from a working class who probably doesn't have the money to buy an apartment in an eco city, for example. And and where the eco city is built, sometimes they had to destroy an environmentally sound place, a natural space for that eco city. So that's the irony of some eco cities. And at the end of the day, the whether an eco city happens or not is also dependent on political agreements. Whether the political leaders and other stakeholders are able to see through building a eco city, which would take several years, if not decades. 10 years, for example. The one in Malaysia, where I am nearby, it takes 20 years, and I'll talk about this after this. And so, if you're only going to talk about eco city that is, a nice green buildings for middle class people, not for other people, then it's just greenwashing. You're not really serious about actually making sustainable change. You're just doing it for the business. In terms of upgrading existing cities, and you can think about this in terms of Jakarta or other cities, why has it been so difficult to implement better flood protection, or better roads, or other policies that increase environmental sustainability in urban areas? Oftentimes, it's due to infrastructure challenges. Even in Europe, I was living in Germany for 3 years, and in the German cities, which are very old, they have very narrow roads, and you still have people who are enjoy cycling. But what has happened is that those cycling tracks are so narrow, and has been a cause for a lot of accidents. Where I used to live in Germany, in Cologne, when there's an accident, people would put a white bicycle in the place of where the accident was, to signify, like, well, here's a place where a cyclist died. So in my area, there were at least like 3 or 4 just near my house. So my husband said, don't go out cycling, it's dangerous. So you need the right infrastructure, sufficient infrastructure for cycling. You have to make it safe. Holland does a good job. It has better cycling tracks than other European countries. So it's about when you're doing all this sort of like development work, you need to have the buy-in from the different stakeholders. California in the US is a state where they're very good in recycling, one of the highest rates of recycling in the country. But when it comes to changing to clean energy, they've had problems, especially with the companies who are fossil fuel. So this is a challenge. You might be good in something, but there's always an opportunity cost somewhere else. So those are challenges, and there's always teething problems when you implement change. When you want to implement a new policy, there's always going to be setbacks and backlash, or from other sectors who are not happy about it. So it's how do you engage these different sectors in a manner that is equitable and agreeable to everyone. So these are just some of the eco cities that China plans to build in their country. except for Forest City. This is the one in Malaysia, which is a joint project between the Johor government and the Chinese company. But essentially, China is planning over 200 eco-cities in the country. And a few of them are also joint venture projects. Tianjin is a joint venture with Singapore. Qingdao is one with Germany. Guiyang, I think it was with France. And all of these cities some have failed, some have succeeded. Tianjin is all right, Qingdao is okay. Dongtan, which is supposed to be on an island near Shanghai, never happened. It's failure more due to political issues in the local government. But why is it that China is going on this massive, quest to build over 200 eco cities? According to a Chinese professor, the Chinese eco city is not supposed to be perfect and like the way the Western world thinks about it, but rather for the Chinese government, it's a pragmatic way of helping China meet its own requirements for carbon emissions and to secure foreign investments. So this came about as a way for China to meet its to do its commitments in minimizing its carbon footprint by creating cities that are sustainable, so that it doesn't contribute more carbon emissions than it already has. And so essentially it's more pragmatic for them to do it. It's not just about we need to save the planet, but it's for the future. It's about the long-term development. It fits into their long-term development because they realize that the development processes and the changing way that the economy works, they needed to change as well. They needed to change and adapt. They realize that there's a new emphasis on natural, social, and human capital. They know that if they want foreign investors to come and invest in China, they have to meet certain environmental and health standards. So that's why. So that's part of the reason why politically, eco-cities are on the map for China. So these are things to think about, especially when what are the motivations behind sustainable cities? It's not just what the ideal is, but how do we actually do it that is in the interest of people who have the power to do it. So this is Johor. This is Forest City in Johor, Malaysia, that I was talking about. It's a massive project. It was launched in 2006 under the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, Najib Razak, and it was part of his 1 MDB scheme. It was also pitched for China to be as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And China's trying to revive the Silk Route. Like how in the past China was very connected with the rest of the world. So now the Belt and Road Initiative was to revive the economic links that China has with the rest of the world. Forest City, it comprises of 4 man-made islands, with a residential technological park and a shipping area. There's a shipping port as well. So that would be part of the Belt and Road Initiative to increase trade in Asia. The problem is the fact that you are reclaiming land, reclaiming the sea. You are building islands from the ground, from the sea. There's already a lot of ecological destruction, right? So if you see here, this is the map. This is Singapore, right? And these 4 islands are the reclaimed land, which is Forest City. There's also a golf resort here that was also built. So this whole part has been going through a lot of development, a lot of construction. This used to be a mangrove swamp area a small desa called Kampung Tanjung Pelepas. So you had a lot of fishermen living here, but a lot of them had to move, had to be relocated elsewhere. I have gone there, and I did see some small villages still surviving, still not wanting to move, and everything else around them is being built. So it's a massive project. It's a lot of environmental costs, but it happens because governments or the prominent stakeholders want it to happen. So this is just another example of what it's supposed to be like. Currently, the only more functioning island is only one part, the residential part. The other islands are still being built, and it hasn't had the construction as much yet. So we don't know whether it's actually going to how far this project is actually going to go, or is it just going to be a dead end project that can't survive? Because that's what happened to some of the Chinese eco-cities that were built. They built all these big cities, but not many people are going to occupy the place yet. So then it becomes a waste. So these are things we need to think about. In terms of existing cities, I've sent Mbak to give you this report. It's a Sustainable Cities Index from 2016 that ranks 100 global cities based on the triple bottom line. And what's interesting from the report is that it says that all the cities, even though the top rank, were not good in balancing the three pillars of sustainability. Rather, they demonstrated split personalities. They might be good in one part, but not so good in the other two parts. This is the top 15 and the bottom 15. So it's interesting also to note that why is it always that the top 15 happens to be the developed world countries, and that the bottom 15 or bottom are the less developed world countries? Is it just a matter of development, or does that mean that developing countries don't have the capacity, or are there other ways of making them sustainable that are not talked about? So it's important to also tease through the statistics. Quantitative and data-driven statistics are great, but we also need to take a more detailed look at specific qualitative case studies itself. Because when you break down these three countries who are in the top 10, okay, Zurich, Singapore, and Seoul. Overall, Zurich is number 1, Singapore is number 2, Seoul is number 7. But they have, in terms of the breakdown, they perform differently. Zurich was good in planet, ranked well in ensuring environmental sustainability and economic, but not so good in people. Singapore also did pretty badly in ensuring the people category, but they did well in profits or economic side of things. And we also need to look at the indicators that these studies use. So in this study, economic indicators refer to transport connectivity, the level of economic development, the ease of doing business, tourism, and tourism is a major sector in Singapore. Connectivity and employment. For indicators in environmental sustainability, it's stuff that we already discussed. And for people, it's about education, health, demographics, affordability. Can you afford housing? Can you afford rent? Income inequality and work-life balance. So Seoul did well in that part, but less so in the other parts. So we need to always, whenever you're reading statistics, you need to be aware of the indicators that are used, the measurements that are used to determine the rankings. So I'll just talk a bit about Singapore, because it seemed to be a very sustainable city. We used to be called a garden city, but now we are transitioning to a city in a garden. So it's essentially taking that level of sustainability a level up. I don't know how many of you have been to Singapore, but you know this is the existing Marina Bay area. The Marina Bay area, this reservoir is a man-made reservoir to increase our water catchment area. And the good thing about how we have developed is that even though we had a lot of urban development, over time, the wildlife has come back. Over time, we have ensured that the planet part, the pillar, has been consistently developed, and hence it brought back wildlife. Here's this one, a forthcoming Jurong Lake District. This is just one of the future projects. Currently it's a residential area, but they want to revive it even further and make it more vibrant. So when you have time, I'll show you the links that you should go and check out. Singapore's Urban Redevelopment Agency, that will show you Singapore's 10-year plan and 20-year 10-year plan development for all the plans we have for urban development. I have to say that when we started out in 1965 in independence, we had to urbanize because we had no choice. We didn't have resources. We don't have natural gas or minerals, which Indonesia has a lot of. We had nothing of that. We only had human resources. We are the size of a small city in Indonesia, right? And we had a lot of slums back then. In the independence period, 1965, we had broken away from Malaysia at that time, and we had and we bought our water. The water was from Malaysia, so that made us very insecure in terms of water, our water supply, So we had overcrowded slums. We had so a lot of effort was taken to introduce public housing, to improve sanitation, and over time in the 90s to diversify the economy. Also in terms of water insecurity, we increased our water catchment areas and we diversified our water resources. So we don't just buy water from Singapore, from Malaysia now. We also have other forms of water where we have the water reservoirs, which we've expanded, the water catchment areas which we have expanded, desalination and water recycling. So this is all over a period of 40, 50, 60 years. This is and so the vulnerabilities of slums, we have experienced that as well. Here's one kampung in Bukit Ho Swee, which basically had a big fire, and so this also created urgent need for people to have safer housing. But at the same time, when all this was happening, when all these proposals for urban sustainability, for urban development to happen, a lot of people were very resistant. It meant that you had to move out of the desa, you had to move out of the kampung, you had to stay in that small apartment, So there was a lot of resistance. Farmers had to give up their land, So it was, in a way, development with an iron fist, you would say. Legislation was made to allow the government to take back the land for national development. And at that time, people were more willing to, because they had to work together. So that it was really a mix of rallying people to work together, plus a bit of a bit of a push, So we did lose our natural biodiversity, our natural forest, but over time we planted it to bring back biodiversity as it is now. From our sole source of water, of imported water from Johor, we have 4 main sources of water now. Water catchment areas, which is a network of about 16 to 18 waterways and reservoirs, desalination plant, and water recycling. So it's a mix of all these to ensure that we are water sustainable. When we out of 1965, our water scarcity was like a sub-Saharan African country. So that's how we have moved over the years. But as you can see, sustainability for us took a long time. It didn't happen overnight or not even 10 years. It took a much longer process of getting people engaged and willing to change. So as you can see, the only natural mangrove forest we have is the red. Primary forest, the dark green, very little. Old secondary forest, So this is the state that we are in, but we try and replant it. We try to still make it green, and we have our public utilities board, which runs our water systems, our water management systems. They are also integrated in the urban planning to make sure to bring people nearer to the water and make people have an active life around the water, so they can enjoy the water, have more affinity and more pleasure being around the water, and hence take care of it more. So that's part of the Active, Beautiful, Clean Waters campaign. The reservoir is not only a measure used for drinking or for water supply, but also as a use for recreational purposes. Despite all those top-down changes to making a sustainable city, we have our challenges. Our recycling rate is 61% 5 years ago, but we are still lagging behind other countries, especially in terms of household recycling. It's only 19%. Most of the recycling that has happened has been industrial waste. So the government has made regulation for manufacturing companies to recycle their waste. So the companies, if they want to run, they have to abide by the law. At the household level, we still have not done enough. We have not done enough recycling, despite all the recycling, bins we have. People are not using it right. They're throwing rubbish inside sometimes. 30 to 50% of the items in the bins are not suitable for recycling. We have a high rate of food waste. People are not into composting as much as well either. So these are issues that you can't just have a top-down solution. It needs a bottom-up solution and initiatives for people to really feel it themselves rather than expect the government to do everything for them. And here's another thing that, I like to always ask people, is Singapore clean or is it cleaned? Are we actually picking up our own litter, or do we have someone, a foreign worker sweeping up the streets for us? So this is something Singaporeans also need to be conscious about, or residents in Singapore need to be conscious about, because you have clean streets. Is it clean because the people themselves are doing it, or is just like it's automated for them? When COVID happened, there was less ability for these guys to go out to work to do the thing, because there's a lot of the foreign workers, the dormitories had COVID, so a lot of them couldn't go out to actually do the work. So there were some instances where people realized, oh wait, why is this dustbin still full? Why has it not been changed? So these are things that we need to realize, that everything is interconnected. How we do things requires somebody's responsibility, if not a community responsibility. So there's a limit to all those penalizations, penal penalties. We fine people for everything. No smoking, no littering. You fine $500, fine 1,000. Has that been effective? Not so much now, I think. And there's also challenges in civil society, because when the government has been so used to taking the lead to do everything, to planning everything, they don't usually ask civil society, unless civil society makes noise. But even then, they will engage civil society when they say. So that over time, the environmental organizations have been active they have been creative in trying to be more active in different ways. This is one example, and this is particularly in terms of transport. So the government is trying to increase the interconnectivity by building a new train line, subway line, MRT line from one end of the island to the other. underground. But this train line, the Cross Island line, will cut through a natural reserve. And so the Nature Society in Singapore has raised the issue. The scientists have said that it will affect wildlife. So the scientists are saying, can you do it? Can the line be diverted to this blue line rather than cutting through? But that costs another $2 billion just to divert. So these are the costs that the government has to take into account. $2 billion for wildlife, or can I save that for other development? Also, they have residential areas near this catchment that are living along the line who are already complaining that there's so much noise. So how do you deal with the residents who have to bear day in, day out with all that construction of digging along that line? So the more you delay the process, the more you get people being unhappy, right? So how do you manage these different stakeholders? This is important to understand when developing policies and developmental policies. I mentioned about the Jurong Lake district that is being developed. So the Nature Society also had something to say about that, where they encourage the government to save more of the forest cover because of some endangered wildlife in that area. And going into COVID, so we've got our water well taken care of. We've got our transport systems. Public transport system is excellent. But one thing that exposed Singapore's vulnerability was our food security, and COVID was really made that glaring, because we import 90% of our food. Less than 10% is produced in Singapore. A lot of it comes from Malaysia, and especially vegetables. Fresh vegetables come from Malaysia, and when Malaysia first initiated their lockdown, panic. So that the Singapore government has had the plan to build the food security, but when COVID happened, that just made the plans go faster. So already this year, since COVID, the government has launched more policy, more funding to support urban farmers, to support new initiatives for technological advancement in urban farming. And the 30 by 30 vision is to produce 30% of Singapore's food supply by 2030. So in 10 years, we expect to be able to increase our domestic food supply by 30%. So yeah, that's a pretty good thing that has come out of COVID, I suppose, particularly for some of my friends who are working in this space of urban farming and urban tech. But we will see. So in terms of the future, what more can we do? We've talked a lot about how governments and stakeholders are developing eco-cities. But as a result of that, communities themselves don't do much. They just follow, right? Especially in the Singapore situation. So I would say that the future of eco-cities lies in building the eco-communities. People themselves have to feel that they have a part to play. People themselves have to be interested to play a part. So there's been movements in urban areas, Singapore as well, and in Malaysia, and I think in Indonesia as well, of permaculture. How can you incorporate permaculture into your urban farming? Permaculture is a bit different from organic farming because you work with the land. You trial and error. You plant certain things together with certain things because they are a good match. So there's a whole technique behind this, and it's about using your resources in a cyclical manner. What you use, you recycle or you reuse. So there are 12 points, there are 12 pillars of permaculture, which you can look it up online. There's a lot of information out there. And how do you get people to be involved in building these communities? You don't have to start massively, like an eco city kind of mass, but you have to start small somewhere. And more importantly, when you engage people that are marginalized or that are having issues, when you give them a say and you give them support, that makes the community more sustainable and more authentic. I have a friend who's doing a farming, eco farm, permaculture farming, and he's employing single mothers and refugees who are in Malaysia, and to be part of that system and providing them shelter, providing them a source of livelihood, and essentially to build their lives, because they are essentially part of their community as well. The single mothers who need to support their families, and the refugees who are stuck in Malaysia. So it's important to really think about eco cities as the whole, holistically, and encompass everybody. Where can people, how can people participate? How can they be resourceful? Humans are human resources. Everybody is a resource, and to participate is only a matter of whether you give them a chance to do it or not. So this is just something David Suzuki mentioned about permaculturists, is that they are doing an important activity for the planet, and they are being creative of how they do it. We don't know what the details are of a truly sustainable future, but we need options. We need to experiment. And permaculturists are one of those people that experiment. Permaculture, actually, when you think about it, is not something that is a Western-centered thing. It's something that is very local, and it's just working with the land based on the land that you are. And when you think about in the Indonesian context, alam takabang menjadi guru. Nature is your teacher. We already have teachings within our local traditional practices, in our local knowledge, that talk about this. So it's just a matter of really taking that out and making use of it and really optimizing it to the best level. Incorporate it with technology, great. Make it tech for good, but essentially keep to the principles of learning from nature, living with nature, and working with nature. So I'll just leave you with these two questions when you think about your own context in Indonesia. How can we be more resourceful locally and nationally? When I was in Indonesia and going to visiting some pesantren, they are having their own organic farms. Are you aware of that? Are you aware of all those local producers producing good food? Are you supporting them? Are you buying food locally from them? Or are you buying it from imported from somewhere else? And so what are the existing cultural and natural strengths and best practices that we have that we can play on, that we can tap on? So in conclusion, sustainable cities or eco cities, whatever you want to call them, they are built over time rather than overnight. It's not short term, it's long term. You may not be there when to see the result of it. It might be your children or your grandchildren, And we need to focus on building eco communities before eco cities. And this means eco communities doesn't have to be in the urban area. They can be in the suburban or even rural area. It's building the resilience of rural people, rural farmers particularly, to be, eco-conscious. So they're not just doing a monocrop. They're not just producing for a company and not getting anything. Ironically, the people that are supplying our food are the people most vulnerable. So these are things we need to think about when we think about how sustainable cities are. And finally, local leaders must lead. They must engage, not only with their people, but with higher levels of government. They must engage in a way that is transparent and fair to their people, the communities that they serve, and they must build trust. So truth, trust, and transparency are essential to how sustainable communities need to have. Sustainable eco cities or communities need to need to come. And so, yeah, I am happy to take any questions you have. We still have some time. I'm happy to also engage with you if you have questions. If you want to ask me online, you can connect with me on Facebook and Instagram. Oftentimes I'm talking about sustainability issues online or on social media. So, connect with me, and we can always talk about this further. So yeah, that's all, and over to Ayu.
All right. Thanks, Sophia. I think it's really fascinating, your presentation.
Thank you.
Apologies, I'm not. I have to off cam now because of the unstable internet connection.
Okay.
So yes, I think your presentations have helped us a lot to introduce about the topic. I think what you did is, I think, would be much better than what I could do to my students, or even we want.
We all have our strengths.
Yeah, it's your thing, right? And also at the same time, I think you pose questions that is quite thought-provoking for us to think about, especially within the context of Indonesia. Yeah, of course. Even in the serious examples that you were mentioning in your presentations, these questions, I've never really thought about it before. But I mean, the idea of eco-cities for me is really tempting and relevant, necessary. I mean, for our civilization today, considering the situations in where we're living now, all the crisis and the climate change. But I don't really thought about the things that you pose in your questions. So thank you so much for that presentations. For now, I'm inviting students and participants here to post questions, or just share your thoughts, or give comments to the presentations, or all the other topics that might relevant us now.
Ya, dan kalau lebih senang dalam bahasa Indonesia, silakan aja. No problem.
So bisa dalam bahasa Inggris, ya. Actually, before I forgot, I was hoping that maybe, even though this is not very much related to eco-cities, but perhaps you might be willing to share some of your findings on that pesantren, on the pesantren, and some of your findings from your research on the pesantren and this eco program. Maybe a bit later, after we take some questions from students. Yep. Charlie, mau bertanya kah? Charlie?
Ya, tidak ibu.
Silakan di mute kalau tidak ada pertanyaan. Okay. Anyone?
Actually, I have a question.
Okay. So, if you do have questions or comments, just please introduce yourself first, and then, if it's possible, please turn on your camera. Okay, so we can see you. Silakan, Andro. Andro?
I think I will off my cam because I'm not comfortable enough.
Don't be shy. But okay, tell me your question, no problem.
Okay. First of all, do you mind if I call you Professor Sofiah?
Just call me Mbak Sofiah, it's fine.
Okay, fine. Yeah, thank you, Mbak Sofiah, for explaining to us about these eco-city issues, especially this more interesting for us, especially for me as Jakartans, people who live in Jakartans. Okay, straight to the point. How can we implement an eco-city program such green space or urban farming in the big cities with full of slums area like Jakarta? And we know that currently Jakarta was facing scarcity of land each year, and the Jakarta government might be allocate several lands into housing area, building, and highways for the sake of investment. Yeah. And comparing to Singapore, does Singapore's government involving the publics on developing an eco city? Thank you, Mbak Sofiah.
Yeah, so, okay, on the last point you mentioned, a question was, does Singapore government is everything. Singapore is there because of the government, okay? Because it has managed the island, like, totally. The whole island is this, I mean, Singapore is a city island, it's a city state, right? So the whole city itself is fairly, I would say, sustainable in its eco city form. Um, it is sustainable because of when we look at those indicators, the 18 indicators, the economic transport, the integrated transport. I can stop at a train station. When I come out, there's a bus stop that will take me to anywhere I want. So and there's always amenities around that train station. So in terms of Singapore's sustainability and eco city level, it's pretty good. Where it falters is the inequalities, and that comes out a bit more of late. How can Jakarta develop an eco city? Okay, I would take a step back. How can Jakartans develop eco communities? Don't have to start big, right? Even if you're starting in your house, what can you do in your house? Do you have a balcony? Can you plant plants there? Can you plant your own vegetables? Can you plant your own herbs? Maybe this is something your mother already does, right? Like, plant jahe or something. Like all those basic things can be done at home. It's just knowing how do you, instead of just planting it on the ground, how can you do it vertically? How can you maximize your space? The good thing, okay, this is the thing about Singapore, is like they always know how to maximize small space, right? Singapore also is land scarce, but how can we maximize the space to be multi-purpose? If any of you will come to Singapore, I'll be happy to bring you to Tampines Hub. This is a multiplex facility. It used to be a stadium, a sports stadium, but then they redeveloped it, and in that same land, in that same space, they have the sports stadium, they have food and shopping, they have tuition centers and classes, they have a lecture hall, they have a community center, and if you go up the level, on the top two levels is a swimming pool. So it's like a swimming complex, public swimming pool. They have an eco garden, a community garden, and the plants that are grown on top, they are grown by volunteers in the community center, and the plants that are grown are used the vegetables and plants are used for the old folks home, the senior homes, for some social organization making the herbal food or salad. And in the shopping mall, the food court, the food waste from the food court, from the hawker stalls, is used and composted in the basement and used as fertilizer in the community garden. So it's thinking about how can you use all those resources in a single space. How can you use the waste for a resource to somebody else? So this is the integrated kind of thinking that we need to think about. We have to break the silos. Just because I have a warung doesn't mean I don't have a part to play. I have food scraps from whatever I'm cooking, from whatever, I can use that for something, but I need a system to put it. Where is the gap that you need to plug to make the system full? So when you're thinking about that in your community, think of what are the missing pieces, and then go from there. Hope that answers.
Yes, thank you so much, Mbak Sofiah. I'm highlighted your words that we should build eco community first to developing this eco city, right?
Yeah, of course. Actually, the city is really dependent on the eco communities. The people in the city are, are the main resource. How you manage your surroundings and environment is dependent on the people. If the people don't think of don't envision and do in a certain way, then the city doesn't function. Correct. So it's about starting small first. And some people, it takes consistency to do this kind of thing. Planting, knowing how to plant. If your plant dies, what do? You're going to give up? No, right? So it's engaging with people who are already, doing it. And I think there are a lot of communities in Jakarta already that are doing this kind of thing. I think if you go online, go on Instagram, there are people who are doing it. Go to those, greeny groups and just talk to them first, see what they're doing, ask them how for advice. I'm sure they'd be more than happy to get you involved in what they're doing, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Mbak.
No problem.
Thank you, Sof. Thank you, Andro. Anyone else? Comments or questions? So is I think the questions Andrew was asking, it's something that we all think about. I think I live in Jakarta, and we know Jakarta is seperti itu, with macet and everything.
Okay, I had another point I wanted to say was, there are these new investment places. They build like condominium estates and all this. They call it eco something, right? But in effect, it's just the branding. It's just a greenwashing. It's not eco.
Big real estate.
Yeah, exactly, right. I think also when we start these eco communities, why start small? Because first you can manage who you work with. You can manage people to you are on the same level with people. It's no point trying to work on a large scale where people have different motivations, different interests, and they don't get things done. You know what I mean? So that's why I say start small. And oftentimes when it comes to this sort of environmental sustainability things, people don't really care. Or people will look at you and say, hey, why are you doing this? When I went to this pesantrens and I talked to the kiais who were doing stuff, they were also called like, hey, the other people in the desa would say they are gila, or like, why are you wasting your time? Why don't I just work for the, why don't I just produce for the, work for a company and I'm fine. So it's about it's a change in the mindset of long-term thinking. When you talk about permaculture and organic farming, it takes time. When you use chemicals on your crops, it's immediate, but the long-term effects can be detrimental to your health. So it's so when you're working small, you work with people that you work with best, and then you build from there. And people tend to not engage when they think it's not going to work. When it's not working, they say, I told you it wouldn't work. But when something happens and something is successful, that's when you see people saying, oh, okay, yeah. So from there, once you have a success case, a success story, then you can engage further and make it at city level or something like that.
And also, I think it's interesting for this COVID-19 thing. I see more and more communities are, doing this. More and more people at the urban areas, especially in Jakarta, are doing these things. So, is that a global phenomenon or what? Did you observe anything, any change or any impacts of this COVID due to how the way we think about eco-cities?
Yeah, I mean, the Singapore government, apart from having new funding to support urban farmers or urban farming, tech in urban farming, They even gave out free seeds to each 2 packets of seeds. Each person gets 2 packets of seeds of vegetables to plant at home to start urban farming in their own backyard, in their own home. You know, and you know, Singapore apartments, we don't have much space. If you have a balcony, you're lucky. If not, you just have a windowsill, right? But the idea is that, okay, as long as I have a pot, I have soil, I take care of it, I water it, you know, we start from there, even as small as that. I mean, even for me now, I'm making use of my garden, which I never used to do, you know, because I'm hardly here, right? It's usually my father or, you know, someone else. But now I'm growing bayam, like the wild bayam is growing non-stop. So it's also like, it's also therapeutic for you to be out in the garden rather than stuck in the room, you know, in the office kind of environment. So it's good for overall health and mental well-being to be around greener spaces. And as I mentioned, you know, there are studies out there that talk about how being in greener spaces is good for your mental health and good for your immunity system as well.
Okay, thanks. Okay, any more questions? Ada lagi? Silakan, bisa dalam bahasa Indonesia loh. Komentar? Tidak ada, teman-teman. Ya, teman-teman dari Undana mungkin? Kalau Kupang bagaimana? Bisa tidak kita buat eco-city untuk di Kupang atau di NTT pada umumnya? Gimana?
Okay, here's a question for all of you. What can you yourself do tomorrow towards a sustainable city? What if you had one thing to do, what would you do? It doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be even like going online to read about something. What would be the one thing you would want to do to start learning more of living sustainably in a city?
Gimana? Ada yang mau jawab?
I think as you mentioned that we can start from the very, very small step. From my end, I think I will turning off my air conditioner.
Yeah, now it's musim hujan, so it's not so bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yang lain gimana yang lain? Ini pada malu atau gimana ya? Itu ada di chat Sof dari Tobagus.
Kenapa kualitas pendidikan tidak masuk ke dalam eco-city? Padahal pendidikan menjadi tolak ukur. Well, one way to think about it, yeah, maybe they don't want you to grow your own food because they want you to buy it from the supermarket. They want you to buy it from the syarikat, right? What's that guy's name? Apa namanya?
Bagus.
Bukan. I'm trying to remember this guy's name that I heard a quote. He said, "School is meant for you to follow, right? You go to school, you go get a job. You know, you do the necessary." So, in a way, in a very controversial way, you could say that, you know, eco cities. Okay, I think they do. Let me change that. Schools do give information about eco cities or sustainability, but very minimal. Correct? They are not teaching you how to farm yourself, how to do other things, because they don't see that as an economic asset, right? You learning science, maths, and all that is supposed to be the stuff that you need to get jobs in the available jobs in the workforce, right? But actually, the education system in a way has to keep up with the changing times, you know? So what we are learning, you know, a lot of the things now that I see, you know, the issues that we are talking about, you don't learn that in school. you have to learn it on the go. No one taught you how to do tech or social media back in school either, right? Now, the being digitally savvy is like a requirement if you're living in a city, right? Even what's his name, Jack Ma said that in the future, with all this AI tech and all your normal jobs can be done by the robot. What is missing is the more soft skills, compassion, honesty, and all those are the soft skills that you cannot. It needs more than just school. It's not something tangible, but it's those values that need to be inculcated in everybody, right? So we need to also realize that with climate change, with digitalization, what is the impact on the future jobs? Accountancy now, there are softwares that can do it. I don't have to get an accountant. There is a software I can do online that will do the accountancy for me, for my company. Then when you talk to my accounting friends, they talk about this. They are fearing, am I going to be out of a job? So we need, now that you are in school, don't only, what you learn in school is great, but also expose yourself to what other information is out there. Mbak Ayu can only guide you in certain ways, but you need to be resourceful yourself to find more information. The information doesn't come to you, only you have to be out there to find. So yeah. Wait, let's see another question.
Yes, there is another one from Anggraini.
What was the most challenging thing about building or operating eco-cities? Does it natural resources or human resources? It's how the human resources use the natural resources. That's the challenging thing. If the human resources are not smart enough or have enough compassion or think more broadly enough and more holistically enough, then they will just use the natural resources in a certain way for one use. They don't take into account other things. So this is also a point I'm trying to say, that when we are developing and when we use resources, what is the impact of our use of a certain resource? How can that use be of benefit to everybody? Why do we use certain resources in a certain way? Is it only for money? Is that the only value that a resource has, or does it have more? So yeah, it's the challenging thing is, how do humans use the resources? And even within human resources, how do humans treat other humans? How does a company treat their workers? And like the 18 standards, I'm always going back to those 18 standards, because one of the standards is quality of life, and equitable living, and that means that you pay a person the right wage. He does work for the right amount that that he needs to survive. You don't exploit people. All these things about fair trade, ethical trade. That's something we should be really doing rather than just talking about. It's cheaper to do this, but and so I think it's also a mindset of abundance that we need to think about. How can we think more abundantly, not have a mindset of scarcity? And this is some talks that people a lot of the people on the business people in online that are talking about having a mindset of abundance, not scarcity. Because when you think about things in a scarcity term, you think, I must get the cheap things, I must get the cheap that. You don't think of quality. You think of only money, dollar signs. You don't think about the value, the intrinsic value that things have, resources have.
Okay, I actually have a question, Sof, because I don't see anyone is raising another question, and this is something that relates to political science. That the discipline of political science. I was just wondering if you could tell us, because people like you are very rare, yeah, in political science. So how yeah, honestly, especially in Indonesia, we were so mainstream in doing political science studies. So how, what do you think is, how relevant is for political scientists to do more studies on these issues, eco-cities in particular, but also generally on environment and politics? Because I took this as an opportunity also for me to, share to the students about the relevance and the future of studies related to environment and eco-cities.
Oh, very.
Scientists.
When don't think. So this is again going back to the point of we cannot think of environment just as airy fairy. Let's protect the earth. Your environment is the natural resources that your country has. Your natural resources that are being exploited. Right? We can go in and you can go into a whole matter of how this is happening in your country. You have a lot of land conflicts that result from leasing of the land to companies, communities being affected by that. This is politics. These are political conflicts at the ground level. When I was in Jogja, just outside Jogja, this was an issue. The tin mining in Urun Progo, it's just barren sandy land, near the beach, but underneath there's a lot of tin, right? And the communities they were fighting up, a company was trying to buy over them, but where do these people go if they sell it, right? How do you empower your own people to be able to challenge corporations for this? So I mean, it's a long-term thinking because environmental issues, environmental resources are the fundamental thing that keep our systems going. Whatever you have in your phone, how many minerals, how many grams of gold is in there? And now we're producing so many phones, so many tech gadgets to sustain ourselves, to sustain our digital economies. Where's all that minerals coming from? Coming from Africa, it's coming from Indonesia, So these are issues that you guys need to think about. Because when you degrade certain lands, those people from living on those lands will come to the cities, correct? They try to find jobs because there's no job, there's no income. Then you urbanization. You put more pressure on the cities. You affect your own quality of life in the city, right? It's all interconnected. So we need to understand that the environmental issues are not just, hey, we protect the earth, but why are you protecting the earth? Because it affects the way you guys work, live, and do things.
All right. There is a question from Johan. Johan is from Kupang, from Universitas Nusa Cendana.
Untuk mewujudkan suatu kota atau daerah menjadi ekosistem, maka harus disediakan juga lahan atau kawasan. Jadi, di sisi jangan kita biar terus kira bagaimana kita menghadapi tantangan. Okay, so he's asking relating to the issue of land scarcity.
Yes, I think that's the question.
Instead of, so I first talked about the two kinds of ecocities. One was the develop a new ecocity just like that. The other one is to upgrade the current city that you have, right? So depending on your area in Kupang, which do you have land for that? If you don't, that's fine. Then you just upgrade the quality of the infrastructure in your land, in the current space. And I mean, again, let's not be limited to cities. Eco-communities, as long as it's a settlement, it can be a rural settlement as long as it's sustainable. Sufficiently sustainable, sufficiently resilient, self-sufficient in every way. If you can do that itself already, it's a good start. Because to run cities, to run communities, you need teamwork. if you're just one person, it's difficult, kan? You need people around. You need people around you to work with. So again, it goes back to start from small. What can you do in your area first? And I guess I was going to say something, but I forgot. But yeah, that's all.
Okay, ada lagi? Alright,
Yeah.
yes, sorry.
No, go on.
Okay, I think tidak ada lagi dari mahasiswa. Maybe you can share us kind of like a closing remarks, or something to encourage the students, because the thing why I want this topic to also be discussed in class is because the thing I mentioned, this is a very marginalized topics within political science. And in our new curriculum, actually we want to grow these topics more, mengembangkan lebih lanjut. So we now have kind of like blocking areas, or apa tuh namanya, semacam spesialisasi for pengembangan kurikulum topik spesialisasi untuk our curriculum in political science. One of it is politics of citizenship. So I would really like to link this topic into our future development of politics of citizenships, by looking at how relevant this topic also in the research and in our courses.
I have a book written by someone on environmental citizenship.
Okay,
so
that's wonderful.
Yeah. Okay,
I mean, if you could enlighten us a bit more, like in which way that we could develop this study or this topic more into our studies in our curriculum, and maybe to encourage students to do research on this.
I think the one area that you could look at is what are the existing relations between the urban and the rural areas. You can start with that, talking about rural-urban migration. Why is that the case? Half the time the rural areas are plots of land are owned by people in the urban areas. What are the relations between urban and rural areas? What are the power dynamics between that? Who benefits for what? I think there's a lot to play with that. So when I just talk about maybe when I was in the pesantrens, the social impacts of people moving out of the rural areas created a lot of social issues there, because you have a lot of the parents going out to work outside in the kota. Children are left behind. You have a lot of orphans, and this is in Ciwidey. This is just 1-2 hour drive from Bandung. Yeah, it's up in the hills. And this Kiai, Kiai Fuad Apandi, he was doing this since the 80s. He was taking in the orphans in his pesantren, but also trying to engage the community around him to do organic farming, not using chemicals, because it affects the quality of the land. When you affect the quality of the land, it affects your productivity, right? So, and half the time when you're doing that, they're selling to corporations and they're not getting any food for themselves. When you do monocrop, you don't have variety. And the interesting thing about organic farming is that when you have variety, or permaculture, when you have variety, that itself is food resilience. You don't need chemicals. So in that sense, there's a whole lot of things you can talk about in terms of resilience, just from adapting environmental sustainable practices. So, and it's not on the environmental impacts for societal resilience, societal support, community support, all all that Kiai Fuad was able to provide for the people, and it later expanded. So there's a lot of stuff just from understanding the urban-rural linkages, that can be explored. And more importantly, what does this mean in terms of how urban areas function? I think in ASEAN, there have been discussions in the ASEAN level on how they want to develop the rural areas. There's always talk about, can we develop the outer areas to reduce pressure on the urban area, one thing, but also these are the fertile lands of resources that you have. Because there's only so much of the minerals and oil that you can dig. At the end of the day, if your land is not resourceful, then you can't do much. So at the end of the day, it's resource management, the politics of resource management, not just your oil and gas, but rather all aspects of resources. I think that's one way to go about that.
Yes, thank you so much, Sof. Alright, people, kalau tidak ada lagi pertanyaan, ada? Tidak? Itu saya bisa tutup ya sesi kuliah tamu hari ini. Terima kasih sekali lagi untuk Mbak Sofiah.
Thank you, Mbak Ayu.
There are two participants here, sitting next to me, who are also listening to your lecture.
Hello. Hi, boys.
They're too embarrassed, I think, too shy to say hi to you. Okay, terima kasih, Sof, untuk waktunya dan untuk sharingnya. Mudah-mudahan besok-besok kita bisa undang lagi ya, Sof ya.
Inshallah, no problem.
And it's a news, good news. Sekarang di Prodi Ilmu Politik UPN Veteran Jakarta, kita punya pusat studi kewargaan dan HAM, Human Rights. So, Center for Citizenship and Human Rights Studies.
Cool.
Newly established, and saya kepengen topik-topik seperti ini kita elaborasikan, bisa kita bikin risetnya atau kita bikin beberapa project yang bisa enhance dan strengthen studi-studi lingkungan dalam ilmu politik ya. And perhaps maybe we can collaborate someday with your, I don't know, whether Hornbill or something else, and you are involved in the project, the new center that we just had.
Can. I mean, yeah, gender and climate, there's a lot of stuff on that as well. Yeah.
Okay. Ada Mas Jerry juga di sini. I'd like to introduce you to Jerry Indrawan, who is also one of the docent in Political Science Department. Harusnya ada Mbak Sekar, tapi Mbak Sekar mungkin nggak hadir. Tapi saya mau mengucapkan terima kasih juga kepada teman-teman semua, rekan-rekan mahasiswa dan semua peserta yang ikut diskusi hari ini. Saya pikir kita belajar banyak sekali dari Sofiah. Mudah-mudahan beberapa pertanyaan-pertanyaan yang Sofiah juga ajukan di presentasinya bisa kita kaji lebih lanjut ya, supaya kita juga bisa firm untuk menjawab beberapa challenge kalau kita bicara soal activities.
I'm happy to have the conversation on social media. Just connect with me and we can talk further.
Oke. Terima kasih lagi, Sof.
Thank you, no problem.
Salam buat Abang and Amin.
Ya. Abang says hi too.
Oke. Terima kasih semuanya ya. Bisa live. Terima kasih, Sof. Saya tutup dengan wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat sore semuanya.
Selamat sore, Bu.